Oh boy, Samara. What have you gotten yourself into now? Hey everybody. We finished our short video series that was aimed at introducing new players to building and playing a character in the Pathfinder 2e system on Foundry VTT. We're now embarking on a new series of videos where we'll be taking a look behind the screen and exploring the system from a GM's point of view. So this isn't geared as a Foundry 101 video. We're not going to be going over the basics of using the VTT, like creating scenes or drawing walls and all that. There are plenty of great video tutorials out there on the base Foundry system that can be found with a quick YouTube search, so I'm not really going to dwell on those topics. My priority here is showing you the workings of the PF2E system in particular. Now, before we begin, I wanted to mention two invaluable resources for the new GM to this system. The first is the wiki for the system, and the second is the Discord channel. I'll drop a link to both in the description, but they are going to be your best friends as you learn to sort of navigate the PF2E system on Foundry. You'll find a lot of what I'm going to show you in this video series written down with greater detail on the wiki, and the Discord is just full of really helpful people if you ever have any questions or you run into any trouble. All right. Preamble out of the way, let's dive in. So for the first video in this series, I wanted to begin with a tour of the monster stat block. So let me just bring that up right now, going to the Actors tab. What I have here is a run-of-the-mill choker. So a lot of the stuff here is pretty self-explanatory, so I won't go through every little header, but let's begin with the token art. So this wonderful art is supplied by the official Bestiary token art pack. Massive props to them. They've made my life so much easier. And if you want to share this amazing art with your players, you can just click this little button in the bottom right of the image and it'll pop up this window. Terrifying. The players can't see it yet though. You need to click the Show Players button to display it to them. And there we go. You'll get a little message saying that's been done. Not to worry, your players won't be able to see the name of the creature that it's from. So you get to keep that information hidden if you want to. All right, up here now we have just the basic details of the creature. You can always add more traits to the creature, traits being, aberration, that kind of thing, by just clicking on the bar next to it. And maybe you're searching for angel. So you can see as I type, the search narrows and I can just click angel and add that trait. If you want to create a trait that is completely unique to this creature, that's totally fine. You can do that. I can just type it and hit enter and it's now added as a trait. This is a good method if you just have one creature with a trait like this. If you want to create a trait that many creatures will be using, for example, if you've homebrewed an entirely new family or type of creatures, there absolutely is a way to represent that, but we'll come to that at a later video when we touch on configurations and the homebrew settings that you can do with the PF2E system. So the top right part of the sheet has two extremely useful buttons, the Elite and weak templates. So with a single click, you can apply those elite and weak adjustments that you can see detailed in the bestiary to all of the relevant stats of that creature. You can see anything that's been highlighted in blue has been modified by the elite adjustment. So this even applies to the DCs of the monster's abilities in their stat block. For instance, as you can see right here, it's DC 21, but if I change it back to normal, it's DC 19. So it automatically applies to those as well, as long as you have those DCs represented in these rollable buttons, these clickable buttons. There will be a future video on creating these descriptions where you can have buttons that you can click for damage, buttons that you can click for saves, and conditions and that kind of thing you can drag out of it. So that's elite and weak, and it goes both ways as you can see. So weak, everything goes red, the stats are adjusted down. The level changes too. I did want to point out that the level here by itself doesn't mechanically change the statistics. Unlike, for instance, with the PC. In our PC videos, when we adjusted the level, all of the saves adjusted, all of their proficiencies adjusted. They even sometimes got the choice of class features. For a monster, none of that is going to change. And that's because NPC stats are far more customizable. The exact numbers are unique to each creature, so it wouldn't make sense for the level to automatically change anything. There is one thing that the level automatically changes, which is the level of spell you have access to, but we're going to come to the spells tab a little bit later. Here we have the skills and DCs for the recall knowledge checks. Hovering over one of them also gives you the DC progression for the second, third, fourth attempt, etc. Now, for a lot of the stuff in the meat of the sheet over here, it's quite intuitive. So just clicking highlighted text usually results in a roll, like that, for instance. And you can modify these rolls just as you would in a PC sheet. For example, if I wanted to make a perception check but give them a circumstance penalty, I would hold down Shift. And I can add that because the roll dialog has popped up. I roll it. There we go. That was lucky. Now, in the skills tab, you can see that just like normal, I can click on it to roll, but some monsters will have these skills in parentheses. For instance, we know the choker gets a bonus +2 to grappling. And if I click particularly that part of the text, it rolls the check and adds that +2. Now, you can set this up for your own creatures as well. But that is delving into a topic called rule elements, which is one of the most powerful parts of the whole system, but is definitely worthy of a whole video on its own. And trust me, that video is coming. Now, to roll attacks, we can just click the blue button here. So that for the first strike, map -5 for the second strike, and so on. And for damage, it is just the red buttons as you would expect. Pretty straightforward. Now, you'll see that when I roll the attack for the choker, this strangling fingers ability is already embedded in that actual attack. And that is super useful because it can remind the PC of abilities, of rider effects, you might call it, on an attack that a monster might have. And you can set this up yourself as well. So if we click this little button to edit the attack, here we can change all of the details of the attack, but we can also specifically add additional attack effects. If we click there, you can see there are a bunch here that are there by default. For example, grab. Grab is a pretty typical monster ability, but you will also see that there are links to any of the abilities that you've created for this monster specifically. For example, I even see yank there as a rider effect. And to get that text displaying when I make an attack, I would just need to check this box right over here. I'm going to leave it with just strangling fingers for the moment. You can add traits to the attack, exactly how we added traits to the creature as a whole, just by clicking up here, either browsing the drop-down menu you see here, or typing until you find the trait that you want. All right, so if we want to create a new strike, for example, say this choker for some reason has a dagger that they want to use, we can just click on this plus melee button. It'll create a new blank strike for us, and we can edit it the same as we would the attack that was already present. There we go. And we can edit the details here just the same. For instance, suppose it might have the same attack bonus, so we'll say 11. And adding damage, I just click that. I can change the type. I can even change the category. This is something the system is getting better and better at handling. You can specify exactly what type of damage you're dealing, which can be important because the system has just rolled out automated functionality for things like immunities and weaknesses and resistances and that kind of stuff. So you set all of that up here. I also want to point out that if you are doing a custom attack, they've really streamlined the process for persistent damage. So you can set that up just by, for instance, suppose it does, 1d4, okay, piercing makes more sense for a dagger. Say that it also does 1d4 bleed. I can just pick it from this list here, bleed, and it knows bleed is always going to be persistent damage, and leave it on the attack like that. If I make a damage roll with that weapon, you can see that it indicates the bleed, but the only thing that's rolled right now, I clicked on this little tab to expand it and look at the different damage types of that roll. Only piercing is given at the moment, but for instance, if I select Samara and take that damage, the persistent bleed effect is automatically applied on her and will tick down on her turn, etc. Okay, that little aside finished, I also want to point out that for the abilities that your monster has, you can send them to chat for your players to interact with as well. These rollable buttons that we know are so handy dealing with spells and that kind of thing. And we send them to chat just by clicking on this little chat bubble here. And by default, your players won't see the DC that they're rolling against. To them, it'll look just like this. Now you can change this if you prefer. If you prefer that your players see the DCs at all times, that is something in the configuration menu, and we'll get to that later. Okay, we'll finish the first page here by briefly discussing the left sidebar. So if you want to edit the immunities, weaknesses, resistances, or speeds, you just click this little edit button here on the side. You can, select whatever is appropriate. Maybe they're immune to being deafened. You click the little floppy and it saves it. It adds it to the sheet. So regarding this field, the bonus to all saves, keep in mind that it doesn't mechanically do anything. It is more a reminder to the GM than anything else. So for monsters that have a bonus to saves against magic, for instance, you'll see it written here, but the actual automated mechanical bonus they get comes from a rule element that's attached to a passive that they have on their character sheet. So I'm not going to go too deeply into that for the moment, except to say that if you want to make a homebrew monster with that automation right now, this very minute, without fussing with rule elements, you can. You just find a monster that already has the bonus you want. For instance, say that we want to give our choker bonus to mental effects, right? So I happen to know, I'll go to the bestiary browser. I happen to know that the unicorn has that bonus to will saves versus mental. So what I can do, even not knowing anything about rule elements, is I can drag this ability they have on their sheet, +2 to saves versus mental, from the unicorn to the choker. Now keep in mind, I can't do this while just selecting from the bestiary browser. I need to import it. And now that it's in my world, I can drag it directly from the unicorn into the choker. And bam, they will now have that too. And if you want, we can check that. Let's have Samara cast Daze. And if we have the choker roll against that, you can see there is the +2 saves versus mental. It is calculated in. So dragging abilities between monsters to copy their rule elements is an imperfect solution. I can't guarantee that it'll always work, just because there are some cases when rule elements might be a bit more specific than you realize just from the text. But it is an option for you to use without going to rule elements. Just regarding rule elements, aside from the video that is coming soon, the wiki also has a fantastic guide to implementing and using them, so go ahead and take a look at that if you can't wait. All right, let's move on to the next tab, the inventory. So, as you might have noticed, unlike some other systems on Foundry VTT, notably 5e, an NPC's inventory has nothing to do with the strikes they make. I could make a strike and, call it longsword. In fact, we made a strike called dagger with all the right traits. We have no dagger, and it works completely fine. So for this tab for NPCs or monsters, it's mostly optional, or it's flavor, or it shows what kind of loot they may have. However, a somewhat recent addition to the system is you can generate strikes from weapons if you want. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this dagger, right, that we had there. What I could have done instead is I can open the compendium browser here, find a dagger, drag that into the sheet, and then click this little lightning bolt you see on the right side. It'll tell you that it's generated an attack for dagger, and indeed it has. In fact, it's generated both the melee and the ranged attack because a dagger is a thrown weapon. It has all the right traits, the right name, and I believe in terms of these values you're seeing, it sort of defaults to around the moderate or high value for a monster of that level. It probably requires some tweaking depending on the exact idea you have in mind for your monster. For instance, if I want to bring this up to match the attack bonus on the arm, I would need to edit that and change that. But in general, this is a great time saver, especially because you don't need to go looking up and cross-referencing the traits to make sure that all of the weapon traits are on your strike. So other than that, this tab works much the same as it was for a PC. The spells tab also works much the same way as for a PC, with just a few points worth pointing out. So for prepared casters, let's go ahead and create a prepared caster list here. You will see that there isn't a big blue spell preparation button, as we saw on the PC's sheet. For reference, looking at Samara, like that button over there, we don't see on the NPC sheet. And instead, it's there. It's just much smaller. It's just this little spell book on the side, but functionally, once you bring it up, it works exactly the same as you would for a PC. The second thing I want to point out is for focus spells. If I was creating a focus spell entry over here, you'll notice that at the moment it is completely blank. Don't worry. What you need to do is, let me bring up the compendium browser, go to spells. Let's clear all filters. Find a random focus spell. And if we drag that in, once we drag the focus spell in, that's when the focus pool appears. Before that, there wasn't anything. But don't worry, once you start adding spells to it, it will appear. You can fill that up just as you can. Any of these fields by selecting the field and then, typing in the number that you want. Same as, 5 cantrips. There we go. 4 first level spells. There we go. The last thing I want to show is innate spells. So it is relatively common for monsters to have access to innate spells that are of a higher level than they would normally be able to cast if they were a spellcaster. You especially see this with things like Celestials and Fiends, because a lot of them have access to Dimension Door despite being lower level. So about that, it's totally doable. All you need to do is, for instance, if it was Dimension Door that I wanted, I would find it in the compendium browser. Here we go, and just drag it to the innate spells. It will show up at 4th level, even though those spell levels didn't automatically show up for the choker at 2nd level. But now say you want your innate spell to be a heightened version of a spell. When I dragged it here, it automatically added it to the, the base level of the spell. But what if I want this choker to be able to cast 5th level Dimension Door? Well, so you're going to need to briefly trick the system. So what I do is I go and I change the level here to the level at which that spell level would normally be accessible for a spellcaster. So in this case, 9, right? So I can access 5th level spells. Then I just drag this Dimension Door to 5th level, and then I can set the level right back down. Easy. It sticks. It's still 5th level. And if I want to hide all of these other levels that I'm not going to be using, like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, there's this other button on the other side of the spell entry. It'll collapse all of those down so we don't have a lot of empty space. The effects tab, much like for PCs, effects is where you'll see all the ongoing effects and conditions currently affecting the token. Not much there to say. The notes tab contains the description of the monster NPC as found in the Archives of Nethys. So this can be a really handy reference tool for the GM to check up on the lore of a monster, maybe mid-encounter, without needing to navigate to that page on Nethys. Okay, I wanted to round out this video on the NPC Character Sheet by taking a look at the token configuration menu for NPCs, because it's a little different from the PCs in one key aspect. So I double right click to bring up the token configuration menu, as we know, and that key aspect is vision. So PC vision is pretty much automated by the system. As long as you have rules-based vision turned on in your configuration menu, and it's on by default, so if you don't know what that is, don't worry, it's on by default. However, it doesn't do anything with the NPCs. So even if an NPC, like the choker, for instance, it has dark vision here, but as I'll show you, if I navigate to the light and turn it off, and I select the choker, there's no change. And in fact, that's because vision itself has not been enabled for the choker. So I navigated to this tab, the vision tab. I want to click vision enabled. And now that's great. That's part of the problem solved, but it still doesn't seem to have dark vision. So to get the dark vision, I want to go to this vision range tab and enter a pretty absurd number, like 500 or something. And that's because in Pathfinder, dark vision is not restricted by range. So this is basically, I'm kind of saying, infinite dark vision. And there we go. Now we should be able to see as a dark vision creature could. You can also adjust this actually to give it dark vision, like the vision mode. You can make it, monochromatic. You can do light amplification. I don't often bother much with this because, it's basically just me who's going to be selecting this monster and seeing through its vision. So it's it's not particularly relevant. Now, the one thing I would recommend, and the one thing that I actually failed to do in this example, but you should take note of, is I adjusted the visions on the token on the map. But as we know, if I drag in another choker, it's going to do nothing for that choker because I adjusted this token instance as opposed to the parent token. So really what I should have done is opened the sheet from the Actors tab, gone into the token configuration settings from there, and adjusted it to be what I want it to be. That'll save you, for instance, having to adjust the token settings for every single one of these skeletons. I can just adjust it on the skeleton guard in the Actors tab and then drag out 3 skeletons, and they'll all be set up. Now, I should point out that this is the state of NPC vision in the current version of the system, which is handy. You can just check it out here, 4.7.2. However, I expect that at some point it will become automated. It is just our sort of band-aid solution for the moment. Okay, so I'm actually going to call the video here. The goal of these videos is to not be too long, so it's easy to watch, and also it's for future-proofing. If an update completely changes the layout of the NPC sheet, for instance, I could just remake this shorter video as opposed to like a giant video with all of my GMing tutorial content. So I hope this video got you a bit more familiar with the NPC sheet and how you can edit it and make it your own. If you have any questions, I can definitely try to help out in the comments. I also really encourage you to ask those questions in the Pathfinder 2e Discord channel on the official Foundry Discord. It's a really helpful community. I've asked a ton of questions there, and honestly, they might be able to get back to you faster than I can. But anyway, until our next video, happy pathfinding!